Hey, this is Ryan Phillips here, and this will be the last installment of a fantastic match between Chris Reynolds and John Trivett. The match has come to a conclusion, and I will not spoil the result ahead of time. I will go through the game. Basically, this was game number 8, and the score was 3.5 going to this game, and Chris had the white pieces. So as you can imagine, it must have been a very tense encounter, as any mistake not only would lose the game, perhaps, but it could also lose the whole match as well. So from that standpoint, I can just imagine that this was a very difficult encounter from a psychological perspective from both players, as it's one thing to lose a game, but I think it's quite another thing to lose a match, especially one that's so close. So you could tell both players wanted to bring their A game, and I think for the most part they did that, and I think we're treated to a very good last game and fantastic conclusion to a very well played match by both sides. I thought both players really impressed me with some very good opening innovations, and not just that. I was expecting the openings to be very interesting and for there to be a lot of innovation. But I was really impressed with the end game and middle game play of both players. That's what really impressed me the most about this match. If there wouldn't have been any opening surprise, that would have disappointed me because I knew that both players were going to try really hard and come well prepared in the opening, which they both delivered on that aspect. But the middle game and the end game ideas that we saw were very quality ideas, and I hope that both players feel like they grew from this experience, and I think they're going to be much better players as a result of playing this match, and it really inspires me to want to play a match myself. I definitely would like to find an opponent to play a good match, and it'd be nice if I could find some financing. I don't know how that would occur, but I think with the time commitment and kind of all the things that need to come in place for a match to happen, that some financial backing would be great. Not that everyone doesn't just play for the love of chess, but it'd be nice if something like that could occur. So anyway, so on to the game. Here we see another Grunfeld, which I couldn't see any other way for this game to have gone. So everything's pretty standard. So here Chris deviated with G3, which I thought was a very nice psychological plan. One, I think the kind of fianchetto position makes it a little bit more difficult for White to have losing chances. So right off the bat, Chris is saying he doesn't want to lose, which is very understandable. He has the white pieces, and his opponent was slightly higher rated than he was. So if he tied the match, I think that would be a great achievement for Chris. So I think the fianchettoed kingside offers a great chance for equality, but also that's the wrong term. I think it offers a great chance to avoid significant losing chances while also keeping a nice grind on the position to try to play for a win. And I personally kind of struggle with these type of positions, and I know Royce has been teaching me a lot about how not to play against these kind of English type positions. So I think after G3, we're almost as much in an English type position as we are at Grunfeld, which is also another interesting note. So we saw G3, which I like in this from a psychological perspective. I think it makes John's job a lot harder to try to win, which I don't know what John's attitude was going into this game. I'll be curious when I see him next, if he was hoping to play for a win, or if he was content with getting a draw with the black pieces and then just having a tied match. And both he played very well. Both sides played very well. So I don't know if anyone thought they had anything to be ashamed of if the match ended in a draw. I certainly hope they didn't feel that way because I think they both played very well. So Bishop G7, Bishop G2. So we have a fianchetto versus fianchetto, and I've been playing against Glenn so much against fianchetto kingside setups. I'm gonna start calling this the Glenn Badari setup. Any fianchetto on the kingside, just because kind of so sick of looking at it. It's very hard to attack, and at the same time it gives a lot of flexibility for your bishop to control a lot of squares. So C6, which I thought was a reasonable move here, just bolster the D5 square. And also kind of try to stunt the length of this diagonal of this bishop on G2. So knight F3, castle. So just normal developing moves. And here John surprised me a little bit with knight A6. Looks like it's computer's first recommendation, and it looks like it's in the opening book. We're really out of a lot of, you could already see it's only been played 6 times in the database, so we're not in a very well-known opening here, which is great. So I'm glad that both players opted for kind of a lesser known opening. So here John actually played a really nice move, I guess, with knight A6. It's definitely I don't usually play knight a6 in too many openings. I probably should consider it more in some openings, especially looking at some of Tal's games in the Benoni. He seems to play a lot of knight a6, c7 ideas. I never really saw Fischer play knight a6. I think I overheard Ron Gross saying one time when they were looking at King's Indian position that he didn't like knight a6, and I think he meant it specifically for that position. But I never really, but maybe he didn't. I really don't know. I don't want to put words in his mouth. But I've never really seen Fischer play knight a6 in almost any position. I can't really recall one position where he played knight a6. He seemed to be pretty happy with developing his knight to d7 in most King's Indian variations, or c6 if he was allowed to. So yeah, knight a6 is I want to say it's more of like a modern, hyper-modern style, but like I said, I see Tal play this move quite a bit, so I guess it's not too unorthodox even from the old days. If you want to call the 60s the old days, depending on your age, you might think it's the old days, or if you're relatively older, you might think that those were the glory days. So either way, though, but I think in the 60s and stuff that this knight a6 idea was already well known. So e4, and then John played knight b6, which is a move I don't think I would have played. I think I would have opted for knight takes c3, but it looks like both moves are pretty reasonable. I think you even play knight c3 and then try for the c5 push still. I think a drawback of knight takes c3 is after b takes, now this knight on a6 can come to b4, which is perhaps a move that John was interested in. But as the game went, he ended up developing this knight to c7 anyway, so maybe just taking here and playing knight c7 was okay. But I'm not really sure. Already this position I'm not too familiar with myself. So now we saw knight b6, e5, which is a very aggressive move by Chris. I think building up the position a little bit more would have been a better option, because for one, I think now the d5 square, you're just inviting the knight to jump back into d5, and then knight c7, now we could definitely put a knight on d5. And also, I don't really see the rush. He's trying to blunt the g7 bishop, possibly move a knight to e4, open up this diagonal for his bishop. So I can understand why he played this move, but I just don't think that it's necessary to play quickly. I like the computer's idea of queen e2 and probably rook d1. And I really don't see any real reason to play e5 anytime soon. I like controlling the d5 square, and white's pieces are very well placed, they're minor pieces, whereas, I don't know, the knight on a6 looks a lot out of place for me, even though it's going to jump into a better place. So I think just sitting on the position and continuing development was a good option for white, as I don't think e5 is going to lead to any kind of decisive knockout blow. If so, then that's when you do it. When you don't have a knockout blow, though, I think just calmly developing your pieces is the way to go. So e5, knight c7, and then here we saw queen e2, and I don't know, I think this queen e2 idea is a lot better with the pawn on e4. I guess we could see what happened though. I guess, so I think Chris had the threat of the position. So what I guess he was worried about with queen e2 is that bishop takes here, and then probably rook d1, and then e5 or c5, and he was probably concerned, understandably, that he would just be down a pawn. So I can understand why he played e5 prior to queen e2. So let's just look at queen e2 immediately, because I think it's important. So bishop takes, which I'm sure was Chris was worried about. Rook d1, c5, bishop h6, rook e8. Now e5, I guess to stop black from playing e5. So I think this e6, this is probably like a killer idea that's very hard for a human to see, especially 5 moves down the line. But this does look like quite a nice move. So say we have bishop takes. There must be something wrong with that. Rook takes. Yes, this is basically a very computer line. So I can understand why Chris played e5 first. So after reevaluating with the computer and looking at how crazy this line would have been defined, I'm not very critical of Chris's e5, and I understand why he embarked on the plan that he did embark on. Alright, so e5, knight c7, queen e2, and then here we saw knight b to d5. Yeah, that looks slightly better to me than knight c to d5. I guess that knight on b6 is, I don't know, it's hard to say. I think both knights are a little misplaced at the moment, so I don't know which knight is more misplaced. And not only do you have to figure out which knight is more misplaced, but you have to figure out, is there any way to get the other knight onto a good square? So you have to figure out what would be the way to get both pieces into like the best position. So knight b to d5 seems logical. Computer really likes developing the light square bishop here and just trying to complete black's development, which does seem like a reasonable plan. Seems like black has wasted a lot of time moving the knights around, whereas every one of white's moves has really been developing a piece or doing something significantly to control the center. So knight b to d5, rook d1, bishop g4. So yeah, it looks like John's development was fine too, though. I don't want to come across overly critical. It looks position looks pretty solid. Both sides have played the opening very well, I think. I can't really think of any significant mistakes that have been made up to this point. So we saw h3, bishop f5. Okay, so go back a move. So h3 seems logical, trying to get the bishop pair. Obviously bishop h5 is out of the question. g4 will trap the bishop. Yeah, and I think it relieves some tension now the knight on f3 isn't pinned anymore, so this seems like a logical move. And with the bishop on g2, it's always nice to kind of have that. It's easy to kick away the piece on g4 with h3 and not create any weaknesses, because if the pawn on h3 ever gets attacked twice, king h2 is usually a fine resource to protect the pawn. And then in some instances, you might even see an idea like knight g5, or even knight g1 in worst case scenario. But usually if that's required, you are getting kind of passive, generally speaking. So h3, bishop f5, knight h4. So that's an interesting idea, knight h4, just trying to get he really wants to get the bishop pair, Chris, which is usually a good goal, and seems like a good goal in this case. And also he's opening up the bishop on g2 for attack. So I think this knight h4 idea is fine. I don't know, maybe developing the bishop. The dark square bishop was an idea. Bishop d2. I don't really like bishop d2. I don't think that's a very human move. And then bishop g5 probably just gets kicked away with h6. So yeah, you don't really have, it's really difficult to put the dark square bishop and the queen on the same diagonal to kind of make some weaknesses on h6. Of course, black has the same opportunity as white does to play h6 and king h7, which is basically the same as h3, king h2. So maybe bishop g5 is not the best idea. Bishop d2 just looks kind of slow to me, but I guess connecting the rooks, probably putting the rook on a1 into c1 seems like a good plan, or at least a straightforward plan. So I can see that, but I like knight h4. I think knight h4 is a good move here. So bishop e6. And Chris is playing really well. Knight e4 looks like a very nice move. Just getting centralizing a knight's always good. Maybe putting it onto g5, or making it hard for black to maybe push with f5 at some point, or f6. And also looks like knight c5 is an idea, trying to hit the bishop on e6. And I think the knight on c7 is a lot of place at the moment. So I think I prefer white slightly here, but black's position is of course very solid, and a typical kind of Grunfeld position where black is going to counter strike at the center. But you have to be careful that you don't mistime things, or you could get run over. So we saw h6, which I don't like as a move, since I don't like this move too much. I mean, he's stopping knight g5, but this knight on e4 could also go to c5, so it doesn't really stop white's main threat, which is to attack this light square bishop here. Alright, so we saw knight c5 here. So already I can feel, white's starting to make some inroads, and now we have like an f4, f5 idea maybe. You have to be careful about king safety, of course, but in this fianchetto line, with the king being able to go to h1 or h2, this f4 idea is not quite as risky. So bishop c8. So Chris has really done a good job pushing the light square bishop of his opponent around. So here we see f4. Maybe slightly premature, but I think this is a okay move still. b6. So I think b6 is a very good move actually by black here. Now the bishop can develop to a6, and now the knight on c7 is actually playing a pretty nice role in guarding the a6 square. So yeah, this was a very nice move by John. Played b6 and put this bishop over on a6. So very, very well played. So now back to e4, which is probably what I would have played. Computer shows knight d3. I kind of would have been a little annoyed by the pin, I think, along the a6 f1 diagonal. So bishop b7, which I don't like bishop b7. Yeah, bishop a6 seems more natural to me over bishop b7. I think I don't know, bishop b7 and c5 is maybe an idea, but it looks like white has pretty decent control of the c5 square at the moment. And I don't know, the bishop on b7 seems kind of like a loose piece to me also, since it's not protected by anything at the moment. And bishop a6 actually attacks something. I don't know if it's driving to the queen to a better square. I don't think so. The queen seems somewhat well placed to me on e2, and I don't really see anywhere better for it to go. Maybe g4 then. But I'm not too convinced that that's the best, that's such a great square for the queen. So bishop a6 seems more natural to me. Okay, and then Chris finally decides where to put his dark square bishop, which is a very difficult decision. It's basically the only piece that doesn't have a very natural square to go to. So I don't know, even a plan like maybe bishop d2, e1, f2 seems reasonable to me here. I don't know, but of course you have to figure out if that's too slow or not. But it seems like an idea, just the bishop on f2 seems like it'd be a nice square. And I don't know, nice, but it's at least it's a somewhat reasonable square. From d2 it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere too important, although you could maybe put it to c3, and then I think it's a knight on d5 takes. I think white would have no problem giving the dark square bishop for that nice knight on d5 in this position. And also, if knight takes c3, b takes c3, that c3 pawn can protect the d5 square. So if the other knight jumps to d5, then c4, and you kind of take away the nice square from your opponent. So maybe black would have to play like b5 in that position in order to get the knight into d5 would probably be an idea. So bishop d2, king h7, which I'm usually a fan of these like prophylactic moves in these type of positions. I think king h7 is a fine move. Just kind of figure out what you want to do next. But the computer didn't like it that much, so maybe my assessment needs to change in these positions. I don't know. It's hard for me to say I hate king h7 because I really don't. It seems like an okay move. I guess in this particular position, it probably it looks like computer showing it just doesn't work. But it seems like a reasonable move to me. Maybe it doesn't address the position exactly, like it needs to be addressed. But it still seems like a reasonable move to me. So king h7, f5, queen e8. So now we see that white is really starting to build up an initiative by getting kind of a kingside pawn storm rolling. And the knight on h4 actually plays a pretty nice role in protecting the e5 square. And it looks like almost all of white's pieces are aimed at the king side except for the bishop on g2. And the central pawn chain is pointing towards the king. So as Len pointed out, that means you have more space on that side to operate, which to me was really kind of a revolutionary piece of advice that he gave me, just saying that you have the space advantage, the direction your pawns are attacking. Because I never really understood why you should attack the direction of your pawn chain, even though it seemed to work all the time, or a lot of the time, but I never understood exactly why. And then Len explained that it's because you have a space advantage, and then everything kind of made a lot more sense to me. It kind of became crystal clear at that point. So I always appreciated that piece of wisdom. So anyway, so here we have rook f1, which was a significant blunder here. But it's kind of hard to figure out how to build up the attack. So the computer definitely likes this position for white, and I like it for white too, but at the same time I don't love it for white because it's not really clear how to take advantage of this. But you can kind of see that black maybe didn't strike the center quickly enough, and due to that white was kind of able to get a free build up in the center. And it didn't take much. Just one move like king h7 gave white the necessary time to build up kind of that big attack on the king side. So as a Grunfeld player, you have to be very careful and not being too deliberate. You have to eventually strike at the center at some point. Even at the expense of a pawn sacrifice sometimes. I mean, because it seemed pretty hard for black to figure out a good strike in the center. I mean, c5 didn't seem possible for most of the game, but maybe it was necessary. Maybe c5 and you don't allow e5 then, because then the e5 pawn could fall potentially. So anyway, though, Chris unfortunately played a bad move here with rook f1. And then here John played bishop a6. And I'm not exactly sure who offered to draw here. I'm assuming it was Jon. That's the common etiquette, but it could have been either side. And it looks like the other side accepted. Whoever offered to draw, the other side accepted the draw, which um, the computer still likes Chris's position slightly, but I can understand why he'd be afraid giving up the exchange here, and especially giving up the light square bishop for black, which I don't think was a particularly good piece for black most of the game. I can understand why Chris thought this was a good position to accept a draw or offer a draw. So here the match ended at 4-4. So it was a very well fought contest, and I think a draw was an apt result based on the games that we all got to go over. So I was really honored to get the opportunity to do these videos. I think it's always nice when you're respected kind of by your peers, and they obviously showed me the utmost respect in letting me annotate these videos for them. Especially, they don't play very many matches, so I'm sure for them it was a huge deal also to have this kind of nice opportunity. And it was a really huge deal for me too to get a chance to annotate these videos. Again, I was really grateful for this chance. And I was happy to see some great Grunfeld games, which is exactly what I was expecting in this match. So yeah, I hope that we see more matches in the club, because I think it's been a great experience for everybody. Anyone that's followed the games, I hope has learned something. I've learned a great deal just from annotating and making the video annotations, and I'm sure the competitors learned a great deal being in these kind of this atmosphere where I'm sure this game particularly was just very stressful, I'm sure. And even though I'm sure both sides wanted to win the match, of course, I think both sides are probably happy that they gave their all, and they could, I'm sure that there's no regrets about the match results. I'm sure both sides realized they gave everything they had, and when you give everything you have, usually you can live with the results in life, even if the results are bad. If you give everything, you're usually not disappointed. So I hope that both sides enjoyed the annotations. I hope both sides learned a great deal from the match, and I hope we see more matches at the club, because this is a very exciting and pure form of chess, and I'm sure the psychological battles that took place off the board, as far as analyzing the different positions in the Grunfeld, was probably almost exciting as the action on the board. I'm sure both sides like, what's the other side going to do in this position? If I play this move, what's going to happen? So I think that's really an interesting part of match psychology. So for the last time for this match, this is Ryan Phillips signing off. I hope everyone enjoyed, and again, great honor to do this. So thank you so much.